Welcome to A Paratrooper and a Yogi Walk Into a Bar podcast. I just walked into this bar and there he is, the Rambo of research, Andrew Fox. And that's Mr. Andrew Fox on Substack and X.
And opposite me at the bar is the amazing Shana Meyerson of the Yoga of War podcast. So I had the bulk of the chat time last week, so I think it's only fair if you start off. What are you thinking about today, Shana?
Your revelations last week were amazing. I could have listened for hours. I was sort of expecting to listen for hours, but we kept it down to about an hour. So let me just say that yesterday was actually my mom's and your biggest fan's birthday. Andrew, she fells over you pretty much daily, not just the days that we come out with episodes, but every day. She just wants to talk about how much she loves you.
Bless her. Well, happy birthday, Shana's mum.
And you just made her year. Happy birthday, Mom. Drinks are on me. Of course, she and I are drinking water, but Andrew, what are you drinking today?
I do have some red wine, actually. I've just finished my dinner, so at the end of a long day, I thought a little cheeky glass of red might not go amiss.
Wild. Okay,
Crazy
let's
man.
get into it. So, boy, talk about crazy. So much has happened this week. So much has happened this morning. It was really hard to pick just one topic. But today I actually want to discuss some of the many thoughts about Trump's visit to the Middle East, and particularly the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC Summit last week. Let me go on record. I say this all with a very healthy dose of skepticism. And I'm going to be going today on very uncharacteristic and deeply cautious optimism about what lies ahead. So let's start off with the topic everyone's talking about. Israel was not at the table. So how important is this? Well, I mean, let's think about this logically, okay? This was the annual summit, right? This wasn't like a random meeting. This is the annual summit of the GCC, which is Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, UAE, and special guest Trump. But it wasn't like this huge round table of like everybody in, right? And also the real focuses of this meeting, and again, I'm not talking about the whole trip right now, I'm just talking about this one meeting, were very transactional, right? It was mostly economically driven, but also there was a big intent on creating daylight or driving a wedge or whatever the word is that we use all the time, honestly, between the Gulf states and China. So something that nobody's really talking about, but there's a real power struggle in the Middle East about, are they going to align with the US or are they going to align with China / Russia / Iran? So I think Iran isn't really that legit, but specifically China. Now, notice that when I list these two things, Gaza was not one of the primary agenda items. But of course, the topic did make it to the table. So here's the thing. There was so much anxiety coming into this meeting that Trump was going to be pressured to recognize a Palestinian state. At least on the pro-Israel chats, that's all anybody was talking about. But the first thing it seems he said when he got off the plane was telling Solomon, however you pronounce his name, that he would like him to recognize the Jewish state, thereby preempting the bin Salman anticipated pressure on America to recognize a Palestinian state. And this is interesting. One thing I just want to keep in mind about this whole dynamic is that Trump is very capricious and very confusing, right, in his messaging. And what it does is it leaves both sides nervous, and everyone expects the worst on both sides. And I think that we need to keep that in mind. Like the Iran deal, for example, that both sides think either A, he's going to go back into JCPOA, or B, the other side is like, oh, he's going to force us to dismantle or go to war. And everyone is nervous. So let's reiterate the thought, or the maxim, the common knowledge that actions speak louder than words. There's a lot of words, but I think we really do need to wait for the actions. Now, I think at this point, and read that to mean hope, that Trump is smarter, and it may be even a lot smarter. I know that rubs you the wrong way. You hate Trump than we give him credit for. And that perhaps he plays dumb, but he's playing the same psychological games of mental manipulation that the Arabs are with him. Maybe he's playing them even better than they are. So here's what I heard in Trump's remarks at the summit, besides the rambling, inappropriate, meaningless, self-serving blather about Biden. Why is he still talking about the election and how much he hates Biden? It's irrelevant, and it was irrelevant to the meeting. But, okay, he made huge statements about getting every single hostage home. And we need to keep in mind who the audience is. And again, what was the point of this meeting? So he put in elements that perhaps I would argue were not really meant to be there, including the Biden stuff. So he talked about getting every single hostage home. He talked about how very, very evil Hamas is and that they have to be defeated, right? And again, consider the audience. He made very clear statements that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons and that they must stop their proxy wars. Now, this is a topic that seems to have been sidelined in the talks. And between yesterday and today, there are more reports that Witkoff is saying the same. Not even 1% enrichment, 0% enrichment. Of course, he mentioned some wild possibilities, let's say, such as Lebanon dismantling Hezbollah, and of course, lifting sanctions on Syria. But yes, we're all questioning, can a tiger change his stripes? But keep in mind that Syria is currently in normalization talks directly with Israel as well. So there's a very interesting dynamic. Nobody knows what's going to go on. And we have to be skeptical, but maybe Syria's openness to joining, the possibility of joining the Abraham Accords, is a success of the Accords themselves. Keep in mind, al-Jilani already mentioned the possibility of joining the Accords before this conference. And one more thing about the Abraham Accords, he made this two comments. One was praising UAE and Bahrain for joining the Abraham Accords, which to me sounded like a clear backhanded message to the Saudis that you are not a part of this distinguished club. Hashtag membership has its privileges. And then he said, although it wasn't in this order, he said the first and the second, but that you will someday, basically, in your own time. He is, I don't know if it was a veiled threat or just very confident that Saudis will join. I saw this as a very unapologetically pro-Israel speech in a captive room full of potential Israeli friends and enemies. Okay, let's get back really quickly to why Israel was not at the table. A, they are not part of the GCC, and they had no place at the table. B, if they came, it would have been awkward. You can talk talkless about your hopes for Israel when you're Trump without any political posturing, if Netanyahu isn't just sitting there and not even smiling, right? I say Netanyahu, meaning the overall administration. But keep in mind also that Israeli normalization with some Gulf state nations does not make Israel part of the Arab world. They're not. They're part of the region, but not a part of the club, the community. So why didn't Trump even visit Israel while he was in the neighborhood? Let's keep in mind a few things. Bibi was the first person to visit the White House when Trump came into power. He was also the first leader to visit twice. They also are in constant contact. And something that nobody is really talking about is like, is Trump expected to like visit Britain every time he goes to Germany or France, for example? Like, I don't think this was a snub. I think there's a big agenda from the left, both in Israel and in America, to try to create a rift between Trump and Bibi, to try to undermine their alliance, the strength of their alliance. And both administrations are saying very clearly and on record that there is no daylight between them. It doesn't mean the US and Israeli interests are exactly the same. No two countries are going to have exactly the same interest. But I don't buy it. I believe that they are in lockstep. And another thing is that if there are tensions, give them credit. They're keeping the actual tensions behind closed doors instead of airing dirty laundry. That's how allies are meant to behave. Nobody's talking about why are these perceived tensions that everybody's talking about when both Trump and Bibi are saying they don't exist. Like what is this wedge? And let me just say one thing about economics before I finish off. Israel is now devising a plan to become totally self-reliant in their defense needs because it has realized that even a BFF or alleged BFF in the White House isn't really a guarantee of anything. It's going to take about 8 to 12 years to build out this infrastructure, and let's hope that this and subsequent American administrations will toe the line until then. Oh, one more thing, just this morning, I mean, literally just hours ago, just as Trump is cozying up to Qatar at the bar, a few hours ago, Israel designates Qatar as an enemy state. The plot thickens. Dun, 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 dun. What do you have to say?
Yeah, it's a complicated old time, isn't it? I mean, I think the American strategy, I think, is flawed in the sense that if they're trying to cleave the Gulf away from China, it's just not going to happen. China's the single biggest investor in the Middle East. Yeah, and it's not close either in terms of it, but Beijing always has a soft power approach. They have a sacred principle of non-interference, so they're not interested in conflicts like Gaza war. Not interested. Yemen, not interested. But what they do is this incredible sharp diplomacy where they give infrastructure projects. They've got the digital Belt and Road Initiative as well as the ordinary Belt and Road Initiative. But it's soft power that they can leverage because they have the ability to switch off the infrastructure tap if people step outside of Chinese strategic kind of thinking. So we see this in Africa all the time. So I think combined with the fact that the USA has got rid of US aid, that is a disaster for American soft power, and China will just step into that gap. So, attempts to isolate China, they're just not going to happen. That's not how geopolitics works. It's a real flawed understanding in the White House where they just see everything as a deal. And what the Arab states, I think, quite reasonably are doing is playing both sides. They're going, hey, cool, loads of investment from China, thank you very much. Oh, and loads of investments from America, and we can buy loads of stuff from you too. Great. So they get to keep mummy and daddy happy, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. So I think it's a flawed strategy. I think the issue that concerns me was the Qatari piece. Actually, Saudi, they're not very nice, but they're the least worst of your two, maybe three choices on the table when it comes to a major trading partner in the Gulf. And they are making progress, certainly superficially. Time will tell whether the reforms they're making are lasting and sincere. But the schnecking up to Qatar is, I think, a disaster. I think, particularly for us in the West, take Israel out of it. I think the amount of Qatari money that is being used for nefarious ends worldwide now has an open door. It was kind of under the radar before. Now it's green light go, and I think he has created a lot of problems for the West further down the line with that decision. It does not fill me with hope. We should be sanctioning Al Jazeera in the same way that we do Russia Today and Press TV from Iran. And instead
Right.
we're wrapping our arms around Qatar, which, yeah, not great, not great.
Agreed.
And I think normalization, like while the Gaza war is going on, it's just not even on the table. It's not even. I mean, we're wasting oxygen even talking about it, because whilst I'm pretty sure Mohammed bin Salman does not give much of a toss, I'm sure he doesn't really care. I think every major leader in the Gulf knows that Palestine is a problem. They just wish it would go away, quite frankly. And you can see by how little support they've given Palestinians over this conflict. Like no offers of sanctuary or asylum or refuge status. They know exactly what trouble they are. But the popular groundswell of public opinion in those countries is very pro-Palestine. Like, I don't know if you've ever dipped into Egyptian television or Saudi television, but my goodness, it's not especially favourable towards Israel, shall we say, to put it in very, very mild, understated British terms. So I think MBS will look at that and just think, look, I can't risk it right now. Much as economically it would benefit all of us, and we can do the energy pipeline through, all that good stuff. They know damn well that if they tried to right now, they'd face a popular uprising. I think the strength of feeling is that strong. So it's a way off. It's a good aspiration. I don't think we've taken massive strides towards it. And with Syria, my gut is it's a bit too soon to make a call. I think we've rushed this one a little bit. I mean, I said at the time when Assad fell, there was a chance. There was a chance for Syria. We didn't know which way it was going to go. But there was a chance, and there still is a chance, and the mood music is positive, and that's a good thing, in spite of Al-Sharar's background. If a sinner repents, then that's a good thing, I guess. But I think it's slightly too soon, given some of the stuff that's happened in recent months in Syria, some of the massacres. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's crazy. By the way, just as a side note, it looks like you're wearing a shirt. I know what your shirt says, but it looks like you're just wearing a shirt that says Hamas.
Says Hamas are terrorists, and on the back it says, "Please do not arrest me." It's a fairly famous T-shirt in the UK. Someone did actually get arrested for holding up a sign saying Hamas are terrorists, and it
Amazing.
cites the Terrorism Act 2000 at the top there as well.
Got it. Because every time you lean back, it looks like it just says Hamas, and I'm like, okay.
Hamas are terrorists. Yeah. So
Okay, changes the story a little bit.
Camera angles.
Okay, what's on your agenda today?
Gideon's Chariots. There's not really much else going on in my life at the moment apart from trying to track what's going on. I've got high hopes that I'll be able to hopefully get some physical eyes on at some point in the next couple of weeks. I think there's 2 points that we really need to understand here. Yes, there's a 5 divisional thrust into there. It's what Israel was talking about in February when I was out there. I was speaking to IDF higher command, and the plans were being made back then. So it's not a sudden surprise, and it's just another step in the escalatory pathway that we've seen since Trump took power in January, which really started with his "I'll rain hell down on Gaza if the hostages aren't released," that famous tweet, Shalom Hamas. And it's accelerated over time. So we've seen limited airstrikes, then heavier airstrikes, then a limited ground incursion, then a bigger ground incursion, then the Morad corridor. And it's a strategy that I think is trying to force Hamas to the negotiating table, and to negotiate on Israel's terms rather than Hamas's. Because at the moment, you've got this Qatari dynamic, and we return to our old friends Qatar. Qatar is, there was a great analogy. Someone said the other day, it's like an arsonist has set a house on fire has run in and rescued someone who's severely injured by the fire they set, and then you're praising them for being a hero when they drag the bloke out of the fire. So that's where Qatar is, and we know that they are giving favourable terms to Hamas. They're treating them as equal partners, equal interlocutors. They are enabling Hamas not to be defeated, quite frankly, because I think anyone having had the battering that Hamas had, all three, sorry, the two remaining Sinwar brothers were killed this week, for example, as one of the 670 airstrikes that Israel's undertaken in the last week, which is quite some going. The dual track we've got here is that they're trying to force Hamas to the table, and if that doesn't work, they will go ahead with the occupation and all of the other parts of the operation that they've discussed. Holding it, clearing it, putting civilians into a safe area, providing humanitarian aid. On that, I'm glad humanitarian aid. It was announced that was going in. I know it's I've seen a lot of sort of Israelis on X saying, Sodom, release the hostages, which, I have a degree of sympathy with that position, but I don't, it's not the one I take, because ultimately we know during the ceasefire how much aid went in. It's on the UN website. You can go and look at it yourself. It's not a top secret document. It's open source to anyone. We know 5 months of food at least went in. And so it should have taken 5 months before people started getting hungry. And now the question you have to ask is, if there's that much food in there, why are people going hungry? It's because Hamas seizes the food, and Hamas uses it as a lever of control over the population. So I think whilst Israel is legally fine when it comes to shutting off humanitarian aid, it's all about, who you are. I think for Israelis, are you going to be the people that sit there and watch people starve to death? Because I'm on a load of Telegram groups of Gazans and stuff like that on the ground, and they are hungry. I don't think the thousands of people that have said it on the group, I don't think it's an information op. It's not. It's all in Arabic translated, and Israel can't sit by and let people starve. It's as simple as that. So I'm glad the aid's going back in. Yes, it's possibly detrimental to the war effort, if I'm honest, but the alternative is letting people starve, and nobody wants to see that, and it would be very much the wrong thing to do, I think. So that operation is taking place, and like I said, it's this dual track. It's trying to put pressure on Hamas to negotiate, and the best outcome that could happen here is either Hamas surrender or agree to leave Gaza completely. And then they can bring the war to a conclusion and work out what comes next. And I don't think anyone's really clearly articulated what that is. I don't think an end state is going to be a Gaza Strip that now loves Israel and is their best friend. I think that's not going to happen. But there is a chance for a more peaceful Gaza if you can do things like get rid of the UNRWA education syllabus that teaches them to hate Jews, if you can de-arm the place, if you can prevent more terrorist infrastructure being built in the future. All those things could lead to, certainly, if not peace, certainly a more peaceful coexistence, and stop repeats of 7th of October and rockets firing at Israel from Gaza. So there is a sliver of hope if that comes off. I think the other end of the spectrum is a very expensive multi-year occupation of Gaza, where they have to dig them out, they have to winkle them out, piecemeal, just keep chipping away at all those different areas within the Strip, and clear them completely of Hamas and all their infrastructure and all their weapons and all their armories and everything else that goes with it. And that is a beast of a job. We're talking years, billions of shekels, probably many, many lives of IDF soldiers. And I don't think it's something the IDF want to do if they don't have to. By far the better solution to get rid of Hamas is negotiation and them just buggering off, and then let Mossad deal with them further down the line. I think would be the most satisfying resolution to that. But yeah, Gideon's Chariots is launching now, 5 divisions into Gaza, huge number of airstrikes to fire them in. And from a military perspective, it's probably useful if I talk about that, because you have what we call a break-in phase. Now, there are areas in Gaza the IDF hasn't been. They haven't attacked the areas where the new hostages were, for example. So Central Camps Battalion of Hamas have pretty much got away quite lightly for the duration of the conflict. And if you're breaking into a new area, you will use airstrikes. Like we would do it, the Americans would do it. Like pick a Western army. That's how you do it. You give massive air support to suppress the enemy, to degrade their capabilities, and only then do you put your most vulnerable assets in, which is your bodies, your human living, breathing bodies, because they are the most vulnerable thing on the battlefield. So you make it as easy as possible for them when you launch in, and that's what we've seen over the last week. And Israel's gone hardcore with it. 670 airstrikes in 7 days is a beast. Hopefully, it represents an awful lot of dead Hamas fighters, which I'm delighted with. But let's not forget the innocent human toll as well. You know, these Hamas fighters are putting their families into the way of those rockets. Like, we are seeing whole families wiped out because look, it's so stupid and insane. Like, you know, I was a soldier. If I was being hunted or fighting an enemy force, the last thing I would do is sit with my family, my wife and children. Like, and they're doing it on purpose because they know they can leverage their family's deaths to damage Israel. Like, how psychotic is that? You know, rather than go into the tunnels or go and hide in the streets or go and try and do anything else other than put your families in harm's way, they're deliberately surrounding themselves with their children and their families so that Israel can kill them and they will then be able to make PR out of it. Like, I think when you put it in those terms, it's so mind-blowing. I just don't get it. And I think that's one of the reasons why people also don't understand why so many civilians are dying in Gaza. We spoke last week about the human shield strategy. This is it in its most pure form. The fighters are using their families instead of body armor. It's mental. So that's where we are. Gideon's chariots. Hopefully it'll happen with as few collateral damage and IDF casualties as possible, but it's happening. Best case scenario, we get a negotiation out of it that frees the hostages and gets rid of Hamas. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just say on the mind-boggling bit, you're so good with the statistics, and I hope that more people will listen to last week's episode and read your report, which was so important with all the evidence. But the real problem, Andrew, is this super imposition of Western values on these terrorists. Like, what's mind-boggling for you is only because you're coming from a Western civilization frame mind, which is the same reason why we have otherwise, I don't know, I'm being too nice, rational people who are demonstrating against Israel, because all they see is through their own framework of Western values. Like, there's no way that they would put citizens in front of bombs. There's no way. Obviously, the only way this could be happening is if Israel is targeting them, and they just don't give these terrorists enough credit for being terrorists. A couple quick things is that the aid has started going in already as of a few hours ago. They're starting off with minimal aid just to make sure that the basic needs are covered until next week when the full apparatus with the United States is in place. I do want to say something funny, not funny, about the status of Hamas terror in Gaza, when you're like, so what happens if you get rid of them? I was listening to like a story today about another like terror leader who was killed this morning. His family was apprehended, and they're like, he's from the third largest terrorist group in Gaza. And like, I'm not sure everybody like understands why that's funny, but it's like, people think it's all Hamas, but obviously we have the Palestinian Liberation Front. Then we have this third largest terrorist group. Then like how many more like terrorist groups are there on that list? And we have to understand that. Another quick thing, side note: 670 strikes, as you say, and it's not that the secondary Sinoirs were just killed. Like, let's go back to the fact, we talked about this last week. This was the attack on the European hospital, aka Hamas command center, that killed the Sinoirs. And also, I do want to say, I do think that the pressure that's been put on is making a difference. They're back at the table. It doesn't seem like negotiations are going very far, but they're back at the table. But if you look I'm going to laugh again at what seems to be on the table in the negotiations. I'm laughing because if you follow the feed, every single source says something the opposite of the last source. But it seems as if whatever framework they are negotiating upon right now is much more favorable to Israeli terms. Like they're talking about 10 hostages in exchange for 200 to 300, not per each, but Hamas prisoners. Okay, so that is normally that would be per each. We'd be talking about an exponent of 10, not an exponent, a multiplier of 10 normally, given past negotiations. Likewise, they're talking, sounds like, giving back all the dead hostages in exchange for I think 1,000 or thousands of just like Gazans who sort of got caught up in the protests and maybe some rock throwing and stuff like that, not like hardcore Hamasniks. So we are seeing better terms. And I've even seen from some Hamas sources, true or not true, that they are considering disarmament and exile. And all of these, again, I can't obviously say that any of these reports is true because the next report 1 minute later will say just the opposite. It does seem like the maximum pressure campaign is starting to have some sort of
Yeah,
effect.
and there's another strand here as well with the humanitarian aid, is that actually cutting it off has worked. Um, it is, I think people would assume that that might make Gazans angry at Israel, and it hasn't. Quite the opposite. All of these groups I've been tracking, they are furious with Hamas, like cursing them to the skies in the strongest ways. And it's message after message after message blaming Hamas for starting the war, for not protecting Gazan civilians, and for prolonging the war as it goes on. They're furious. And you saw protests again today. There was actually much bigger protests than some of the previous ones that we've seen. So, to an extent, that decision to cut the aid, whilst it's been taken to the edge of morality because people are starving, but we have to blame Hamas too for that because they steal the aid. But it's turned Gaza's population against Hamas, which is kind of the point. So, and I think if Hamas lose the people, then they know they've lost the war. As long as they have the popular support or the ability to control the population, two different things, but the same effect, they're okay. They're in power still. The war can end if they stay in power and they can crack on with doing what they do. If they lose the people, that's a game changer. So combination of military pressure and domestic Gazan pressure, hopefully will get us to a resolution that doesn't mean that hundreds of thousands of young Israelis have to go and conduct counterinsurgency in a rubble field, because that's a truly cheeky military task. Fingers crossed.
Praying for the idea of praying for an end to this war, praying for peace. I mean, as ridiculous as it is, it's the only chance for the Gazans to create a better future for themselves. They're going to have to at some point acknowledge that peace with Israel is going to have to happen if they ever want to have any sort of prosperity or normalcy in their lives.
Yeah, as they call them, the Yahud are not going anywhere, unfortunately for them. And so the sooner they make peace with that fact, the more peace we'll have across the entire region.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hopefully you found that informative and interesting, and hopefully you'll have questions and comments. If you ask questions, we'll happily answer them in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week.
Yeah, and don't forget to click the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode and you don't have any excuses for missing an episode.
Okay, we'll see you next week. Cheers.
L'chaim.